If you have any questions, any technical, please send a message via the chat to the host, and we will try to help you. And by having that, I would like to say, to move to the next slide and also hand over to my colleague, Timon Bernhard, also part of the Secretariat of the Initiative of Core Regions in Transition. And Timon will introduce a scientific perspective as an introduction for setting the scene of today. Timon, over to you.
Hi everyone. Thank you, Carsten, for pitching this topic and passing this on to me. We now have almost 140 participants online. I don't think you'll see that, but I see that. That's good to have such a great interest on the topic. And we've asked you in the registration some questions on the future of hydrogen, and I would like to jump into that. Next slide, please. As those of you who have participated in further events of the Core Regions in Transition Initiative, this is of energy transitions, but it's very much about the economy and job creation questions in core regions. And so we ask you when you registered, do you see that, or do you expect that hydrogen will create jobs, a significant amount of jobs in the EU core regions? And roughly 3/4 of the respondents to that poll said yes. You see that there is a potential of job creation, and that is definitely something we'll discuss with the presenters and the panel we have with the speakers, what kind of jobs could be in core regions and what kind of support and what kind of framework do industries and the whole hydrogen economy would need, what kind of decisions would core regions need to take today to rape those potentials of hydrogen. Next slide. It's Carsten said hydrogen is a very special fuel, and there's a big hype. And I've looked a little bit into scenarios. These are different scenarios of the clean energy, clean planet for all publications from the European Commission, looking at in 2050 what final energy demand will be. And you see the orange bar in the lower graph. You see that is the part of hydrogen. And what you immediately see that the share of hydrogen is strongly different in the various scenarios, depending on the scenario assumptions. So there is a large uncertainty of the amount of hydrogen we see in the future energy system, but there is definitely a certainty that it will be much more than today. And next slide, please. If we look into that into a more detail, again, you see on this slide the amount of hydrogen in different scenarios in the year 2050, scenario assumptions. You see the strong variation of very little hydrogen in some scenarios and large shares of hydrogen in others. That makes it hard to decide on what do we do. But we also see definitely some, I don't know, there are some key messages that are clear that, for example, in the power sector, in transport, there are definitely some uses of hydrogen. In industry, especially for example, chemical industry, steel industry, there's need for hydrogen as a feedstock. It depends on questions of how expensive or cheap are alternatives, how quickly can we bring down the cost for hydrogen. But those four sectors are probably the sectors that hydrogen can play a major role. Next slide. That is an assessment we as from the Research Institute, I represent the Wuppertal Institute, have done and looked at where are actually hotspots of future hydrogen use. And in this map you see on the right-hand side, we only looked at some industrial sectors, chemical, steel, and cement, but there are, of course, other uses. And urban areas definitely will be hotspots of hydrogen use in the future. But we will definitely see that hydrogen there are some regions that will have a strong demand for hydrogen, and among them are definitely some coal regions, where other regions probably have less of a hydrogen demand, but could actually be hydrogen suppliers because they have a large renewable potential. So the question of a specific strategy for your coal region, but for individual coal regions is something we will have to be working on in the next years. To really get a feeling of what is it specifically this region will need in collaboration with other regions and in setting up exchange between regions, developing infrastructure and so on. Having said that as an introduction, next slide, I would hand over to Ruud Kempenaar from the European Commission in DG Enner to present something on the hydrogen strategy. And Carsten, if you don't want to chip in for more introductory words, I would directly hand over to you, Ruud, to present us the European Commission's view on the European hydrogen strategy and some pathways and necessary steps to be taken in the immediate future. Over to you, Ruud.
Thank you very much, Timon. And if you can confirm that you can hear me, then I hope the rest of the audience can hear me as well.
Works well.
Okay, thank you very much. So let's dive into it. Why has the European Commission published an hydrogen strategy? The hydrogen strategy was published on the 8th of July together with the energy system integration strategy. And the rationale is kind of threefold. First of all, after the publication of our communication on the European Green Deal, and as well the political commitment from the EU member states on climate neutrality in 2050, it's clear that we now have a roadmap to climate neutrality, which means that we have this whole suite of options which is needed, like Timon just presented, to get to this objective. And hydrogen is indeed one of the basket of options which we need. So here we have a clear commitment that in 2050 we have climate neutrality, and that's an important driver for hydrogen and other decarbonization options. The second reason why we have the hydrogen strategy is because industrial competitiveness is also one of the key important issues. We've had recent announcements of China, Japan, Korea, etc., which are also have climate neutrality on the agenda. So same as the European Union, they will have to look at options to completely decarbonize all of their sectors. So Europe at the moment is front running these developments, especially in the area of electrolyzers. So this is something which we need to capitalize upon. The third one, which of course we didn't know at the beginning of the year, but that has increasingly become clear, is that with COVID, we have now the opportunity to, of course, develop a package, a post-COVID recovery package, which brings forward investments. And our attempt is to bring those investments forward in two areas: digitalization and the green economy. And again, there, electrolyzers is one of the key opportunities which we have, or renewable hydrogen production is one of the key opportunities that we have to bring investments forward, investments which we need, which we know we need, but we can now bring forward and also contribute to the other two objectives. So in the next slide, I kind of give a view on how the European Commission sees our future energy system. And we heard just from Carsten words like hydrogen is champagne, or hydrogen is a key element of the energy system. And I believe we take a little bit of a broader perspective. And indeed, hydrogen is one of the elements, but so are many of the other elements. Electrification, digitalization, much more connected infrastructure, and consumers, which play a much more active role in our energy system, and the opportunities to switch electricity into gases, gases into electricity, gases into fuels. This whole suite of options and a much more holistic perspective on our energy system is the view of the European Commission, and this is where we're looking now at different kind of options to make this happen. So what did we publish on the 8th of July? So the next slide shows you essentially the two strategies which we published. The first strategy which we published was the energy system integration strategy. Essentially, in this strategy, we say three things. First of all, in order to get to climate neutrality, we need to have a much more circular and energy efficient energy system. And this includes the uses of direct use of renewables wherever it is possible. Secondly, we need much more deep electrification of especially those end-use sectors which are currently still very fossil fuel dominated. So here we're talking about the transport sector, the residential sector, but also the industry sector. And of course, there renewable electricity is one of the cheapest options available to make this decarbonization happening. The third pillar is the use of renewable and low carbon fuels. If we look at a system in 2050, we expect that 50% of this could be electrified. Then we have 15% of heat in there, direct use of heat. We have solid use, but then we also have gases and liquids, which will be a substantial part of our energy system. And here is where the hydrogen strategy comes in. The hydrogen strategy, which we published in July, essentially takes a full value chain approach to hydrogen, and I will come back to that later. And also, it was combined with the launch of a Clean Hydrogen Alliance, and I'm happy to take some questions there as well, because I think that's an interesting initiative where also the coal regions can take advantage of. So in the next slide, I show you kind of the broad overview of what the hydrogen strategy says. It essentially provides a roadmap where we see three specific phases. The first phase is the next couple of years, and this is where this current Commission has, of course, its Next Generation EU as a major instrument to help bring forward investments in the next couple of years. So in this first phase, up to the end of 2024, our objective is to install 6 gigawatts of renewable hydrogen electrolyzers and produce up to 1 million ton of renewable hydrogen. The current situation is that we have about 10 million tons of hydrogen consumption, and 95% of that is in the industry sector, and 95% of that is fossil-based. And so here we believe there's a massive opportunity to already start replacing the existing use of fossil-based hydrogen with renewable-based hydrogen. As such, we see a lot of this renewable hydrogen development taking place where the consumption of hydrogen is already today. Timon showed you just a map about where major consumption centers are in 2050. Our colleagues of the Joint Research Center will very soon publish actually a study which they did, where they specifically look at where is the hydrogen consumption in regions in Europe today, and also specifically identifying the hydrogen consumption in coal regions to see, okay, what are the opportunities there for those regions to replace already the existing fossil-based hydrogen with renewable-based hydrogen. Here we see, of course, some need to already start developing hydrogen infrastructures, but those hydrogen infrastructures will mainly be local. So to supply the renewable hydrogen to the existing production centers which are there today. Soon after, we see another scale up, because from today's situation where you have about 60 megawatts of electrolyzers to 6 gigawatts in 2024 is already a massive scale up. Now the second scale up we see between 2024 and 2030. So here objective is to have about 40 gigawatts of renewable hydrogen electrolyzers and essentially produce about 10 million tons of renewable hydrogen. So more or less the same amount of hydrogen which is consumed today, but done based on renewables. In this period, we see also new applications being fueled by hydrogen, particularly in the steel sector and also in heavy duty transport and long distance transport applications. Here we also see the creation or the early start of some hydrogen valleys. And again, this I think is an interesting concept for the coal regions and transitions, because for some of those regions we see really opportunities to not only connect hydrogen to industrial users, but create an ecosystem around that, especially from a kind of commercial perspective. In the period up to 2030, we expect to see some cross-border infrastructure taking place, and already some member states, especially in the northwestern part of Europe, are already planning such infrastructure. So looking at kind of existing gas pipelines which could be repurposed for hydrogen. Now the third period is the period after 2030. Again, this will be a massive scale up. The question is indeed what Timon just said as well. Okay, what is the scale going to be in 2050? Our expectations, Timon showed the long-term decarbonization strategies which we developed, but also the more recent analysis which we did for our climate target plan shows that around 10% of energy consumption in 2050 could be on the basis of hydrogen, which would translate into about 500 gigawatts of electrolyzers. These are just assessments, and we don't know if it's going to be more or less, but this gives a kind of a ballpark figure to think about, okay, what is the future of hydrogen? And here, then we expect, depending on, of course, on innovations in the other areas, a scale up of hydrogen in all those hard to decarbonize sectors where hydrogen really makes an economic and added value. The other area, which I think is of interest, and of course, is that after 2030, we really see also a scale up internationally and a much more EU-wide infrastructure network to indeed bring hydrogen from those places with high renewable energy sources to the demand centers wherever that is needed. So this is kind of the broad layout as we, the European Commission, sees it. And of course, this is now in discussion with the member states, and later I will also have to go to the European Parliament today to indeed discuss this with the European parliamentarians, which also are developing their opinions on this basis. So the next slides shows you where we see some of those end-use applications. These are the four which was mentioned by Timon, but especially the heavy-duty transport and industry sectors we think are some of the key application areas where we see renewable hydrogen production being used first. The other one, and that's why also this long-term strategy of our strategy has a long-term kind of objective to focus on renewable hydrogen, is because we think that's the most compatible with a climate-neutral economy, and the analysis suggests that this is the most cost-competitive option in the long term. Not today, but definitely in the long term. Now, the next slide gives another perspective on our hydrogen strategy. Because on one hand side, of course, we're looking at this timeline. We're looking at different application areas, but we clearly see that hydrogen is kind of an investment agenda. Here, I give you some figures of the potential investment opportunities which we see in the period up to 2030. So in the middle, you see the investment opportunities in the production of renewable hydrogen. So 24 to 43 billion. But more importantly, we see massive opportunities for renewable electricity production as well. So coal regions have a lot of opportunities to indeed invest across the supply chain. Now, in the next slide, I give you a very brief overview of the different kind of policy options which are being considered in the hydrogen strategy. I'm not going through each and one of those, but I'm happy to take any questions, because I think it's important for a coal region not only to focus on potential investments which they can attract or potential users of hydrogen, but to look at the different suites of options there are to engage. So we have investments in production, investments in demand, investments in infrastructure potentially, research and innovation opportunities, And especially for those regions which are kind of are on the fringes of the European Union, there are also opportunities to play an important role in terms of connecting Europe to the rest of Europe or even beyond that. So with that, I'm going to close and hand it over back to Timon and Karsten for the next session. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Ruud. Thank you very much for that presentation. I think that gives a very good overview, and you broke it down in many cases to the coal regions, highlighting both the challenges and the opportunities. Before I go into the asking you some questions, Ruud, there are first participants have on the put questions on the Slido, and maybe we could go to the next slide so that one more maybe. Right, so that you can all see. Please, if you have not done so, log in at slido.com. You put in the password CRIT3, and then you can add your questions. Ruud, I've looked at the question. It's some of them address policy framework, and I mean, Karsten put it that way. Hydrogen is somewhat the champagne in the energy system. I mean, I'm a physicist, and I like hydrogen because it's clean and it has a lot of technology thing. On the other hand, I'm a physicist. It's not a fuel. It's a storage option, right? We lose energy every time we produce hydrogen. We have to produce it. It's energy intensive. And basically, I would say whenever we can avoid using hydrogen, it's probably good to avoid it. So there is this ramp up of hydrogen infrastructure and support you described in the roadmap, but there is a balance between, yes, we have to make it cheaper, but we have to be very careful in which sectors and which areas to promote it, because we don't want to promote it in areas where in the long run it's not going to be efficient and cost effective. If you look into policy measures, what are policy measures that you think are important? There is a question here that is relating to carbon contracts for difference for hydrogen or other policy measures. What do you think is important in that policy frame to push that roadmap in the right direction?
Absolutely. I think you point your fingers at the right issues. So I think I want to break down my answer in 3 elements. So first of all, I think it's really important, and this is also what the European Commission is doing in all of its communication, to put the hydrogen strategy not as a single individual policy, but put it always next to the energy system integration strategy. It's part of a bigger strategy to decarbonize, which has these other pillars in there. Direct use of renewables, where you don't have the efficiency losses. Energy efficiency, of course, first, because then you don't need to produce anything at all. And then, of course, electrification, because there you don't need to convert this electricity into gases, etc. And again, you have this energy efficiency principle as a guiding issue in terms of looking at your different options. So this is the first one which you want to do. And you'll also see this, we're developing now guidelines for member states on how, for example, the new funds for the recovery can be used. We try to put this everywhere in place to look at this whole kind of holistic perspective. The second element of my answer is that the hydrogen strategy, and this is why I focus on this today, really looks at phased approaches. Mm-hmm. So this first phase is really looking at, okay, where is fossil-based hydrogen produced today? We know it's 80 to 100 million tons of CO2 emissions per year, which are produced in Europe because of fossil-based hydrogen. So we have there a direct opportunity to contribute to our increased ambitions for greenhouse gas emission reductions in 2030. And we know this is an area where hydrogen is needed. So this is why we have this phased approach focusing on this first. Same for infrastructure. We know that these are the industrial sites where hydrogen will be needed, and therefore we're focusing again in terms of infrastructure and kind of allowing renewable hydrogen to be able to be used to kind of decarbonize these industrial applications. Now here, maybe also the question comes in on the CCFDs, these carbon contracts for difference. And here we see a potential to look at what is the cheapest way in order to have these emissions being reduced in the period up to 2030. At the moment, we know that, we know based on analysis that renewable hydrogen is more expensive still than fossil-based hydrogen, and the estimates suggest that it's more expensive than to put carbon capture and storage on some of the fossil-based hydrogen production facilities today. There are no projects yet, so these are estimates, and this is where the CCFD can come in. The carbon contracts for this difference is a tool which we're exploring right now at an EU level, which essentially would allow the different kind of technologies to compete with one another to see which one is the most cost competitive in reducing those greenhouse gas emissions. This will be only one of the different tools, but this is one of those tools which we're exploring, because since we don't have any projects in place yet, we need to have that information. Now, the third one is indeed that in terms of your question, we really have to look at not only the cost competitiveness, but also looking at the whole ecosystem. And here I saw a question on jobs, for example. And that is where, in terms of the guidelines, we're not only looking at, okay, what is cost competitive, but also what creates added value for the different regions. And then we're talking about new economic opportunities across the value chain. And that's why we, in the strategy, look at electrolyzers, because there we see added value across the value chain, which can remain in the EU. Same for renewable hydrogen and the source of renewable energy that we need for that. As you can see, that's where many of the jobs are going to be. So that's also one of the reasons that we look at these issues, not only cost competitive, but across the value chain. And then in terms of these jobs, we did an analysis and study, and I'll put a link in there for everyone. This kind of gives a breakdown of the different kind of jobs which we expect to see across the value chain for every €1 billion of investment in the technology.
Great, thank you very much. If I pick one aspect out, one message which I find very strongly, maybe particular now important for our core regions, which is if you have the potential to harvest local renewable energy sources, go for it. I think also the investment concerning the value chain, that was the biggest investment area which one could identify using your study. My question in this regard maybe also relate then how can we guide core regions that would like to look into options of hydrogen at the same time at renewable energy potentials, just to understand if their renewable energy potential is enough. We know that renewable energy will increase, but also the demand for electricity will increase, likely triple. So in the future towards 2050. So in that aspect, any guidance from your perspective, how to ensure that green hydrogen, for instance, based on renewable energy, can be produced within particular regions?
So let me start with the first aspect. And I indeed showed you the kind of the investment opportunities for across the value chain for the production of renewable hydrogen. Now, if you break that down in jobs, for every €1 billion of investments, you have about 6,600 jobs in the production of the renewable electricity for the hydrogen production, about 3,000 jobs in the hydrogen production itself, and then 1,000 jobs across the value chain in terms of transportation and storage. So indeed, most of those jobs are indeed in the production of the electricity itself, rather than the production of the hydrogen. So this is an important indeed element. Now, the second element is indeed to look at, okay, what are the opportunities to produce renewable electricity? If we look at our 2050 analysis, we indeed see much more electrification, so increasing need to scale up renewable electricity consumption. And for our 2030 targets, the 40 gigawatts, we expect to need an additional 80 to 120 gigawatts of renewable electricity capacity. Now, if you would translate that in terms of what we need to get to our renewable energy targets, it's about 15 to 20% more than we would need just to satisfy electricity consumption. And so I think these are kind of ballpark figures which coal regions could also take into consideration. That if you have hydrogen production, fossil-based hydrogen consumption, and you want to replace that, of course, but this is kind of the ballpark figure at an EU level. Now, if we look at 2050, we expect indeed that if we are going to decarbonize all of our steel, if we're going to decarbonize a lot of our chemical sectors in particular, and especially kind of this long-term, long-distance transports in terms of aviation or maritime, then in total we would need about 20% of all the renewable electricity produced in 2050 to be used to produce hydrogen. So it's a significant amount, but still it is of course doable. Now the question is, does everyone need to be doing this locally or not? I think especially in terms of industrial applications, it will highly depend on, okay, what is the most cost competitive option? Is it importing, producing it locally, etc.? The industries themselves will be key players there in terms of making those decisions. But maybe coal regions can also play an important role in terms of guiding those decisions, in creating kind of the enabling environments for those industries to settle locally and create local value.
Yeah, thank you for that. Ruth, there are some questions that deal with, very concretely with the job potential in coal regions relating to a transition to hydrogen or an increasing picking up of hydrogen use. And the question, of course, is the more of the existing infrastructure and more of the existing employees we could keep closer to hydrogen production, the easier that transition seems to be. So there is, for example, this question of what is the potential of hydrogen produced from coal using CCS versus hydrogen from renewables. There's, of course, the question of using gas as a transition fuel or gas and CCS. How do you see that field of how much of the coal infrastructure or coal use can be used in a future hydrogen system? Is there a potential or a significant potential for coal plus CCS to produce hydrogen? Is that in line with the climate ambitions, or what is your view on that?
So if we look at the CO2 emissions associated with the production of fossil-based hydrogen today, which is 96% that it's based on natural gas, you're talking about, say, very roughly 10 kilos of CO2 per kilo of hydrogen. Now, there are different options to use carbon capture and storage. The fossil kind of the steam methane reforming plants we have today have different streams of CO2 coming out of their system. Some of it is quite pure and quite easily to be captured. Otherwise, other streams are quite dilute. Now, in order to get to low carbon hydrogen, you would need to start capturing both streams. And of course, you need to have opportunities to store this CO2 somewhere. So those are the two parameters which you definitely need. You need to be able to capture both streams of CO2, so go close to 90% of the CO2 being captured, and then of course have the opportunities to store it. So those are the two parameters which you need. Now, coal, hydrogen base produced on the basis of coal does not take place in Europe today. It is a technology which is used in China, but not in Europe. There are a couple of disadvantages on the basis of that. First of all, you would need to have still significant investments to convert coal into hydrogen. And if we look at kind of the fossil-based hydrogen which is being produced today, putting carbon capture, retrofitting it on an existing plant is much cheaper than converting a coal-fired power station into a hydrogen production facility, and then on top of that, put carbon capture and storage on top of it. So this is one important element to consider. The other one is that, of course, if you produce hydrogen from coal, your CO2 CO2 production doubles. So we're roughly talking about 20 kilos of CO2 per kilo of hydrogen if you produce it from coal. And that again has implications for your carbon capture and storage, because if you want to then go to low carbon, or even as the European Parliament is now talking about ultra low carbon, you would need to ramp up that percentage of carbon capture quite dramatically in order to get to those thresholds. So although we're not excluding everything, I want to go back to this first element, and that is, I think, to take a much more holistic perspective. So if you have a coal-fired power station today, you have key workers which you have today. What are, from an energy system integration perspective, the options which you have in order to retain those workers and get the best value out of it? Is it hydrogen production? Is it electricity production? Or are it other forms which I just mentioned throughout the whole value chain, including options for transportation, for storage, for other services to this energy system? And I think that's storage, for example, battery storage, just to give an example. And I think that's always very important, not to kind of bet on one horse, but look at the different options which are available, and then look at those options which create the highest value within your region.
Thank you for these insights, your perspective, working at the European Commission, and also the various scenarios and being confronted with various opinions. And therefore, I think you gave a very nice overview for us now to dive further into the different aspects. We couldn't answer all questions, but maybe during the discussion we pick up some further elements that have been posted to you also now to the different presentations that we're going to have. So first of all, thank you. A virtual applause to you, Ruud, for being with us. Now I would like very much to go to indeed the value chain for hydrogen, infrastructure, clean hydrogen, and look at different opportunities ahead. First, I welcome to stage Hans-Joachim Polk, member of the executive board of VNG AG in Saxony-Anhalt in Germany. And we're looking forward to your presentation and then some discussion points. Hans, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just a short check. Can you hear and see me? Okay. As far as I'm informed, there should pop up a presentation exactly. Please stay a moment with that slide, because I'm also speaking telling about a short introduction of Saxony-Anhalt, since Dr. Ude was supposed to participate. He's a state secretary at the Ministry of Economy, Science and Digitalization in Saxony-Anhalt. So please allow me giving a short introduction on behalf of him. So the development of a green hydrogen economy is an important part of the structural change process in the East Germany, German coal regions. And this summer, the three East German coal regions, Brandenburg, Saxony and Saxony-Anhalt, published a joint key issue paper on the development of regional hydrogen economy. Based on this paper, Saxony-Anhalt is now working on a hydrogen strategy, which of course breaks down the German national hydrogen strategy into more details. And that focuses on the specific circumstances with especially a strong chemical industry we have got in Saxony-Anhalt. And there, the use of hydrogen as a feedstock in the chemical industry plays an important role. And the companies in the so-called chemical triangle in the central Germany are large industrial consumers of hydrogen, so far being produced from methane. And together with that great potential for renewables, Saxony-Anhalt is an ideal location for the demonstration of future-oriented hydrogen technologies. We as VNG are an energy company firmly anchored in Eastern Germany, has been being active along the gas value chain in the areas of trading, high pressure gas transport, storage, and biogas, respectively methane, for more than 60 years. With our recently updated VNG 2030 Plus strategy, we have an even stronger focus on the development of decarbonized business areas with green gases. And now with the project, I come to that project in a second. This Bad Lauchstädt Energy Park project, we would like to contribute and demonstrate to an energy world of tomorrow. Then we see the next slide, please. Well, yes, this is a schematic of the setup of that project. You know, Bad Lauchstädt is really in the vicinity of one of the most modern chemical parks and industry parks we have got in Germany, called Leuna, just 20 kilometers away. And there we have got located our gas storage facility called Bad Lauchstädt, and we are operating there various so-called salt caverns, where we today store huge amounts, around about 1 billion cubic meters of natural gas in various of those caverns. So we thought that's an ideal setup in order to demonstrate now the combination of hydrogen production, storing and transport, and of course utilization, and so we have set up this project. You see here various partners. I mean, Terawatt is responsible for erecting a new wind farm with an output of about 40 megawatts. Then the Uniper has run one of the first power to gas projects in Falkenhagen, which is probably well known also within this audience. And so it was an obvious partner for us now to go a step further in building now a large-scale electrolysis of 35 megawatts. And that is then, at least for maybe 1 or 2 years, one of the largest electrolyzers being operated in Germany. So then this is connected to an underground storage. It's one cavern with a possible volume of 50 million cubic meters of hydrogen. 50 tons roundabout of hydrogen. So quite a huge and impressive amount. So now we have to get this hydrogen then to this industrial area. And that's why we want to convert an existing natural gas pipeline with a length of 20 to 22 kilometers to this area. And there we have the option to connect that pipeline to an existing H2 network operated by Linde, or maybe we go directly to a customer. That depends on the demand profile. And this pipeline is good for 100,000 cubic meters per hour at a pressure of 35, maybe 50 bars to transport huge amounts of hydrogen into that region. And then, you know, you see here our two affiliates for the storage. We have got VNG Gasspeicher, and ONTRAS is our unbundled affiliate responsible for gas transport, and that's why they are involved too. And then we start a marketing and a sales program, creating business cases together with Uniper, so our trading companies, and hoping for finding, of course, enough customers being ready to use green hydrogen. And that all is accompanied by an institute called Deutsches Brennstoff-Institut. They are for a long time deeply involved in questions all around green hydrogen. The next slide, please. Yeah, and then you might ask, okay, why do you start now? I mean, most likely nobody needs the storage. Well, that's a very valuable question, and that's why we have phased the project So we start with a wind farm, building the electrolyzer, and then you know, we erect or we design surface facilities where we test all sensitive and important parts, compressors, gauges, and maybe process components, which are very important really to deliver reliably H2 in the requested quality. And then when we were able now to increase the demand and maybe increase also production, since our facility is good for installing another 200 megawatts of electrolyzers, then a storage comes into place and makes sense. And then let's take it from there. And this timeline shows, I guess, also when we heard the EU program and the ambition, it will take time. Yeah? If you start designing, if you start getting all approvals, yeah, and then start with the construction of such facilities, and you see here it takes time, and that's why we have to start now and not wait another couple of years or 3 years. However, this is supported by a program initiated by the German government. It calls Reallabor, and we are just about to send in the application in order to get this project funded by the money or the funds provided by the German government. Next slide, please. Yeah, and that. And another ambition is, of course, and is okay, that we think, and with our partners, we believe that this project is a good example for how to transfer or do the energy transition by reduction of CO2 emissions, definitely offering storage for renewable energy. And please don't forget, I mean, we all talk about, okay, where should the hydrogen goes? But you know, one of the original ideas thinking about storage was also to provide maybe the only huge and significant storage for renewable energy, yeah, in form of hydrogen, in order also to provide the hydrogen for repowering or powering energy in times of wind and less sunshine. So please take it into account too. And then I think this project really shows how to link sectors using wind power, and that can goes into mobility, what we heard from the predecessor, into the chemical industry, but also we think it is good for urban energy supplies, heat, power. The next slide, please. And I guess that's my last slide. Yeah, and summarizing this, okay, it's not a self-running project, for sure not. I guess we have to cope with various challenges. It's 3 times as expensive as gray hydrogen. Cost for storage increase hydrogen price even more, and the added environmental benefit of green hydrogen is not rewarded yet. Thus, customers are not prepared to pay higher prices. So we need, of course, mechanisms. There are some in discussions. For instance, the carbon contract for difference could be a good tool. We will see, definitely. Then the storage capacity in salt caverns is huge. So only high turnaround allows efficient operation. So production volumes of green hydrogen are relatively low today. And of course, we need adjustments of the regulatory framework, allows little scope for experiments. Unfortunately, so however, this Reallabor is definitely a highlight where we definitely can start. So demands on policy, as well as Germany and the EU, is incentives really for the use of green hydrogen need to be created. The regulatory playing field for electrolyzers we definitely need. And as I mentioned, the regulatory framework for H2 transport, similar to what we know from the natural gas transport, should come into place. And that's basically my very brief presentation, and hopefully that was enough for generating questions and give you an insight we think is possible. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Hans-Joachim, for that presentation and for really an insight in a region. Before we go on to the next speaker, a very quick question to you, because there have been a lot of participants have asked us on really skills and knowledge. Has that been an issue in the region, or how have you ensured that actually you have the skills and the knowledge to set up such a project, or do you see a shortage in skills and you need support for that?
Well, I mean, that's why I introduced Saxony-Anhalt a little bit and the chemical areas. I mean, we are convinced, and also our partners, that there are quite a few skills around we can use for such projects. Our experience is that we create a good tension for people being part of the new future, yeah, and they want to contribute with their knowledge. And I mean, Saxony-Anhalt and Saxony and all these governorates, they have a fantastic system of universities and institutes where we think we are able also to generate and motivate people really to start studying this new energy system, including hydrogen. And you know, when it comes to the coal region, I mean, we are in discussion with the coal regions. And maybe you allow me this little sidestep that also my company is promoting the so-called pyrolysis, where we crack methane into carbon and H2. And that is something which is very interesting to the coal operators, since they are able to run complicated plants. It's a very short step for their workers also to run a hydrogen plant such as pyrolysis. And even if we have too much carbon in place, because you generate a lot of carbon out of such a process, maybe the coal regions are able to deposit or to store for some time this carbon. So this is also a very interesting model for coal regions, and definitely good for transition, because we are of the opinion that we need all hydrogen with a low CO2 footprint we can get in order to start and not to wait longer for the 100% ideal solution. In summary, no, I'm not concerned. In particular for the regions, we know that there will be no problem to find enough staff, running plans, and also being involved in the renewable energy system.
Okay,
Thank you
very much, Hans-Joachim Polk, for your perspective of Saxony-Anhalt in Germany. Now I would like to call to stage Mara Huberman, moving to the Netherlands, and to be more precise, to the northern Netherlands region. She's replacing Patrick Knoben, who was supposed to speak here. Nevertheless, we are even more delighted to have Mara Huberman with us.
Thank you, Karsten. It's very good to be here. Unfortunately, I am not Patrick Knoben, who was supposed to speak on behalf of the Northern Netherlands. He called me yesterday evening if I could take over the presentation. So most probably I won't grasp all the technical details as good as he could do, but I will give it a try. And yeah, let's start. I think we can go to the next slide. My name, first of all, is Mara Huberman. I work for the Northern Netherlands office here in Brussels, amongst others on the energy file. But what is the Northern Netherlands? Where can you find us? Well, let's start. We are actually the three provinces of Groningen, Drenthe, and Friesland. And we present the four large cities, Emmen, Assen, Leeuwarden, and Groningen. And we're located, as you can see in the bigger circle, we're located in the northwestern part of Europe, and we border Germany and the North Sea, which gave us which geographical position gives us a unique opportunity to develop our hydrogen economy further. So if we go to the next slide, then I will tell you why are we here today. What is the situation in the Northern Netherlands? We are a region that is actually starting to enhance the energy transition. And this came actually, if we look back in time, in the 60s, we discovered the gas fields in our region, as you can see on the red dotted part of the map in the presentation. And that meant that our region became the #1 energy supplier of the country. And by exploiting these gas fields, and that also made the energy sector the second largest economic sector after agriculture in our region. We, in terms of jobs and in terms of revenue, we kind of became dependent on gas. And if we go to the next part of the slide, if you can click next, you can see that gas production was very large but is declining. And we have actually decided to halt the production in 2022, but that means that we also need to find other solutions. Why are we phasing out? Well, first of all, because it's not a very green solution. There's a lot of greenhouse gas emissions, paired with gas, and also, we have been experiencing quite heavy earthquakes from the 1980s onwards, which made it for the population quite unlivable. But yes, if we are phasing out gas by 2022, we need to have an alternative. And if you go to the next slide, you can see that we if we go back. Yes, this one, that we have carried out a study in order to see where do we stand as a region, what happens if we phase out gas, are there other viable solutions for a region in order to maintain the socioeconomic standard. So a couple of smart people came together and they drafted the report Green Hydrogen Economy in the Northern Netherlands. And this study actually shows an enormous potential for green hydrogen for the socio-economic future of a region. And hydrogen was indeed shown as a viable solution for maintaining this socio-economic situation, and thereby also delivering the reduction of greenhouse gas and contributing to the climate goals that we have. So if you go to the next slide, yes, you can go. Yeah, this is fine. It is. How do we become a hydrogen economy? What do we need actually in order to become that? There are several paths to reach this goal, and one of them we have identified in our region is the Just Transition Fund. This is set up by the European Commission in order to help regions with their transition, with their energy transition, and in order to also overcome the socio-economic challenges. We are actually a perfect fit for this since we have decided to halt the extraction of natural gas. Like us all, like other regions, we also are facing the reality we need to reduce greenhouse gas and to overcome the challenges that are paired with that. And we have a large energy intensive cluster in our region. And if we stop that, we will have a huge challenge with our labor market. If we go to the next dot, as you can see, we will face a dramatic loss of 20,000 jobs. This was actually shown by a study carried out by the GRC in 2019, and the study elaborated on the question what will happen if we close the Groningen gas field. And since it's the second largest economic sector of our region, they have identified that if we do nothing, if we let it just happen, the phasing out of gas, then we will lose 20,000 jobs, which is very huge for our region. So we're very happy to learn from the European Commission, from DG Regio, that in Annex D of the European semester, Groningen was pointed out as one of the beneficiary regions, the target regions for the Just Transition Fund. And what we could offer actually with using the fund is to have more research and innovation, to use advanced green hydrogen technologies in order to overcome the challenge, and also to deploy clean and renewable energy to become more efficient and to also reduce the greenhouse gas. But for that, we also need upskilling and reskilling of workers. Because the transition doesn't come, transition from a natural gas job to a job working in the hydrogen economy doesn't come naturally. So if we do nothing, the jobs become obsolete, and therefore upskilling and reskilling is very, very much needed. If we go to the next slide, I can tell you what we have done so far. So in 2019, we have applied and we have been granted a 20 million grant from the Fuel Cell and Hydrogen Joint Undertaking. And this grant will be topped up with 70 million euros from a public-private sources in order to establish actually the first hydrogen valley of Europe, called heaven. So we came from hell with the natural gas, and now we go to heaven with our green hydrogen production. What is a hydrogen valley? Actually, a hydrogen valley is a dedicated area where hydrogen is developed along the whole value chain of hydrogen, from storage to production, from industry use, for mobility use. You can see it all in the map. So in the first cluster, we really we make sure that we produce renewables, that it will be set in green hydrogen. In the second cluster, and you can also see that we store it, that we use it also for heat, in order to heat some neighborhoods in gemeente Hoogveen in Groningen. In cluster 3, you can see that we use it for mobility, so for buses. And the same goes for cluster 4, also for mobility and refueling. If we go to the next slide, we can also see, so what we done so far. We have set up this European Hydrogen Valley. We're working on that, but more is needed, and more can come actually from our Hydrogen Investment Plan 2.0, which was actually launched 3 weeks ago by the Northern Netherlands, both by the public stakeholders and the private stakeholders. They have collaborated together to set an ambitious plan for 2030 in order to see how we can make the transition towards a hydrogen economy. And it is because the Northern Netherlands, we have as a region, we have a unique opportunity to cost effectively develop the whole integrated hydrogen ecosystem, to become a game changer in the global hydrogen development, and to accelerate also the Dutch hydrogen momentum. Due to, well, we have, first of all, we have a unique access to critical assets in our region for cost competitive hydrogen ecosystem. Thereby, we were looking at a systematic approach for integrating self-sustaining value chains for end users. And we have an existing pipeline network, which is very important, where we can use 50 committed projects, which will accelerate the existing momentum. So if I summarize it, we have both expertise and infrastructure. We work on manufacturing, we work on innovation, and we also work on the skills agenda, the knowledge agenda. So what do we want to do on the short term? It's phase 1. It's from 2020 up to 2025. So it's the coming 5 years. It's phase 1. It's about maturity and scaling up, making sure we have enough hydrogen capacity by 2025, and that will require 850 million of investments. And then we have phase 2, and that is the Northwestern European expansion. It goes from 2025 up till 2030. We will further grow in 100 petajoule of hydrogen capacity per year beyond 2025, and this in total requires 9 billion of total investment. So to To realize this whole hydrogen opportunity in the Netherlands, we work together hand in hand with our regional governments, with the industry, with the knowledge institutions, and we have developed this 18-month implementation plan. I think because we were told not to speak more than 7 minutes, we can go to the next slide. It's also good to know that, as I mentioned before, we are one of the first recognized European hydrogen valleys by the FCHJU, but we're not the only one. Together with Normandy, Auvergne-Rhône-Alpes, and Aragon, we also work in a partnership, the European Hydrogen Valleys Partnership. That's 40 regions working together from making the step from fossil fuel regions to clean hydrogen regions. And what we believe it's important is that we as a hydrogen valley do not work alone, but we team up with other valleys. As you can see on the map, with we look at teaming up with Portugal, with Spain, with Hungary, Romania, Ukraine, with Greece, with Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, but also with German regions that are very close to us, and mostly with regions that represent the yellow dots and the blue dots. But I think the speaker after me will tell a bit more about this ambitious plan. I think we can go to the next slide. That was it. I think I have give you a little bit of overview on what we do in the Northern Netherlands in order to overcome the challenges that we have with energy transition, that we look at the green hydrogen economy as a viable solution for the future energy demand and supply development, and setting up an economy that we need in order to make the transition towards a cleaner source.
Very much.
Yes, that was it.
For your for delivering this presentation, also highlight that there are differences between urban and rural areas where one should look at, as well as where to apply. And you rightfully highlighted the energy intense areas which we have in Rotterdam and near Amsterdam, but also in the further to the north of the Netherlands. So here, thank you for sharing your insights here. And without further ado, I would like now to introduce Mark Rechter. He is co-founder and CEO at the. And indeed, Mara, as you just said, actually, it's a wonderful bridge towards his perspective, if I may say so. Also, some slides will become, fall into the same places here. Thank you, Mara, for being with us. Over to you, Mark.
Thank you very much, Karsten, and thanks also to Mara for the fabulous introduction. I will talk a little bit about our experience in clean hydrogen, or green hydrogen rather, development across different international regions, and the lessons that we've learned so far, and that we're trying to apply to accelerate the clean and green hydrogen transition over the next decade. Next slide, please. Thank you. First, very briefly, a little bit about Resilient Group, which you may not be aware of. We've been around for about 10 years and focused on innovating business models and integrating technologies across 3 areas. One is a specific focus on solar PV. Secondly, we have a digital activity where we're bringing digital solutions to the market within the energy and build sector. And thirdly, since about 2017, we have been active in the green hydrogen sector. Next slide, please. In the green hydrogen sector, we started out back in early 2019 building what we felt was an important strategic objective for Europe, which looked at creating strategic supply chains, basically linking markets or linking potential supply and demand areas within Europe. really looking at where over the next decades Europe will be able to produce green hydrogen competitively, and how that green hydrogen can be taken into the demand centers of Europe, which, as we know, of course, one of those demand centers is specifically focused in the Netherlands and German context with the Ruhr area, etc. So this project became quite well known over the past year, also with the onset of the hydrogen IPCEI plans of the Commission. And the lessons learned out of this process were quite substantial, which we've taken and are looking to broaden. If we can go to the next slide. First of all, we looked at the opportunity of the hydrogen, or the emerging green hydrogen sector, better said. We identified that it was not just about producing the green hydrogen to, let's say, accelerate decarbonization of the different sectors that have already been mentioned, but also very much a potential driver of industrial scale-up, jobs, investment attraction, and energy security for Europe. And I believe that the European Commission has very well identified this by linking the Green Deal very closely to the industrial scale-up objectives that Europe I would say almost desperately needs over the next 10 years. So some of the areas that we've identified for industrial scale-up are mentioned on this slide, and we have ourselves focused very much on bringing both electrolysis manufacturing as well as photovoltaic module manufacturing as part of the projects that we have been developing. Next slide, please. So over the past 6 months or so, we have broadened the scope of the initial Green Flamingo project, and looked at how we could connect, let's say, the broader Iberian production area with very, let's say, low-cost solar potential, and some of the numbers are mentioned on the right here. We have a clear roadmap to LCOEs of around 1 cent per kilowatt hour, or better said, perhaps 10 euros per megawatt hour for solar over the next number of years down in the south, which will lead with the cost compression of electrolyzers to a highly competitive, non-subsidized cost of hydrogen. So the let's say the foundation and the structural outlook is there. What needs to be done is basically create the market, and to create the market, of course, we need infrastructures, and we need supply chain strategies, and that's what we have worked on, basically broadening the scope and entering into further development activities with different partners across different countries. Next slide, please. And so today we are actively developing projects across the countries that you see on this slide. But while doing that, we've also learned quite a bit about the value of different typologies of projects. And one of the interesting analytical questions is really, what is the maximum impact that we can achieve with projects if we compare what we call the so-called mega projects versus what I would call the bottom-up projects, or the regionally driven projects. And this is particularly important because the energy transition, of course, is primarily focused on decarbonization and helping us achieve our climate targets. But at the same time, if we want to build a new industry, we need to have a very, let's say, well thought through approach to driving jobs and driving investments, mostly I would say focused on regions, and helping regions to identify how they can take advantage of this huge change in the energy system to position themselves and to make medium to long-term support, investment, and infrastructure decisions that will help their regions to take maximum advantage of this transition, or perhaps better said, transformation. Moreover, we've been closely working on regional roadmaps and with a very strong focus on SME involvement. Next slide, please. So the way we've done this is really looking at kind of a system of systems approach. We have to look at how all of these different factors interact and impact on a regional level. And this slide identifies some of the key drivers around, let's say, that approach. We have to be looking at efficiency and economics, of course. But definitely also at synergies in terms of cross-domain impacts that we can achieve. Next slide, please. And then, of course, we come to the market mechanisms, and the market mechanisms are a very interesting topic to analyze, specifically also because the regulatory framework comes into play here. And if we, on the one side, look at the energy transition as a cost, which is, very often still the case in dialogues that happen, perhaps we tend to focus on, the supply side. So we need to gain scale. The financial component is one of the key drivers, and centralization tends to be kind of the natural way of thinking when we look at it from that perspective. However, there is a broader set of gains of value that Europe can and the regions, of course, can achieve in the medium to long term. And that has everything to do with, of course, the socioeconomic impact as well as the financial impact. What we call so-called local relevance. So how can regions determine strategies that connect them with what is going on a more global level and take advantage of that in the medium to long term, and very much go for the decentralization that is such an important part of the Green Deal. One example is auctions, renewable energy auctions. We've seen some extremely low results recently in Portugal, for instance, with the last solar auction achieving a 15-year PPA of 11.2 euros per megawatt hour for a 15-year PPA, which is, well, I would say unimaginably low if we consider that the wholesale market fluctuates between 40 and 50 euros per megawatt hour. And the question is really whether that type of mechanism is helping the European industry move forward, and whether it helps to create strong industries, firms, and ecosystems from an industrial and economics point of view. And so that's a question I would leave for the policymakers here. Next question, please, or next slide, please. Sorry. Next slide, please. Thank you. So we have a couple of examples where we are working to create integrated regional cross-domain projects. This one here in North Rhine-Westphalia, which is one of the regions in Germany and in Europe, I suppose, that has a huge challenge in the energy transition, but at the same time a huge opportunity. We are actively developing a photovoltaic cell manufacturing plant in this region, bringing, let's say, clean tech industry with significant job opportunity to this region. And we are currently trying to connect this to deployment of those cell and modules that are manufactured in the region to electrolyzers that are just also happen to be manufactured in that region, and of course create jobs as that sector grows. In order to generate green hydrogen on a local level to also help decarbonize or accelerate the decarbonization of the industry that is located in North Rhine-Westphalia, which is of course a lot. So without going into the economics, because that's a whole different story, this is one example of how we're looking to really integrate cross-domain industries to deliver what I would say maximum impact for also, of course, a lot of public investment going into these sectors, and really looking how we can maximize the long-term industrial and job creation and investment attraction impact of a specific region. Next slide, please.
Mark, without being too impolite, can I push a little bit for time?
Yes, 1 minute and I'm done. Thank you. So this is the second interregional program that we're working on with the Extremadura and Alentejo regions, which have an enormous potential for a large-scale, very low-cost green hydrogen production. But of course, they need to have regional and municipal roadmaps, and that's something that we're working on with them so that they can connect to the European strategy and pipelines, as you see here. Next slide, please. Okay, and last but not least, connecting to what Mara just presented, we are actively working on a broader pan-European, what we call Hydrogen Valley ecosystem development opportunity, where we're looking to connect different local and regional actors under a European ecosystem strategy, so that there can be sharing of lessons learned, best practices, etc., but also giving these regions the opportunity to interconnect into the future European green hydrogen market. And I think I'll leave it at that. Next slide, please. Thank you very much. That was it for me. I'm sorry if I went a little bit over time.
Thank you, Mark. That was very interesting, and I think especially how you show the activities in the region, the challenges in the region, and what happens in individual regions, but how that is interconnected across the regions. I think that is extremely interesting, and I think we're going to pick that up in the discussion after the next presentation. Thank you, Mark. And I would now go over to the next presentation, Jakub Trubrovic from ENTSO-G, and actually it's I don't know, it's been you've already been prompted. ENTSO-G looks obviously very much at infrastructure, at grids, and the question of how can we transport hydrogen in regions or between regions in the short and in the long-term future. And with that question and without further questions, I would hand over to you, Jakub.
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you for being here with you. It was also last-minute call, so I'm replacing Ms. Piskor, who is the director within ENTSO-G. So I will try to brief you a little bit on the ENTSO-G perspective, on the hydrogen and its role and let's say pathways towards the further decarbonization of the coal regions. Only a few words that ENTSO-G is a European network of gas TSOs, and it was established in 2009 with the respect of the European Regulation 715/2009, just to give you a little bit of the background that it's due to the EU law happening. Next slide, please. So especially for the reason of understanding what will be the future of the gas grids and what kind of the role gas grids will play within the decarbonization process within EU, ENTSO-G has prepared its 2050 roadmap. The roadmap is in-depth kind of analyzes what will be the role and the future of the gas grids. Within the ENTSO-G roadmap, it was established 3 different pathways. Pathway based on methane, the methane infrastructure, second based on the methane and blends of the various gases, and the third one as a blend of the hydrogen. Next slide, please. So coming to the, let's say, more in-depth analysis, what was established as a priorities of further cooperation of the ENTSO-G and its role within the whole process of implementing of the hydrogen. So within the roadmap and all the messages that we are working within ENTSO-G, we have, as I mentioned, methane blends and the hydrogen pathway, as well what is as well new due to the Commission hydrogen strategy. And thank you very much for so many of the in-depth in knowledge and information that were given by the Commission in the beginning. We have, as a ENTSO-G, we are responsible for the TUNDPs, and within 2022, we will have a first TUNDP, which will include as well European hydrogen backbone. So this is also something new what is happening and giving the kind of the flavor that we has established hydrogen as one of the important and key factor. And as well, what is still important for us while we are planning the gas grid and adoption of the hydrogen and blends, we are having even much more closer cooperation than before with ENTSO-E, because for ENTSO-G is very important that the interlinked model will be well implemented and both infrastructures will cooperate in the best possible manner. But what is of a crucial importance for us as well, it's a smart quality management services. So the quality of the gas and the quality of the service will be on the high possible level. Next slide, please. But coming to the specifics of the coal regions and the role of the natural gas, there are a number of the natural gas infrastructure. There are to be underlined in here. So within the coal regions, we are having the energy intensive industries. So those who are highly dependent at the moment on the production of the energy are the products based on the coal. With the pathway that we are taking into consideration, we see the switch from the coal to natural gas and then to the hydrogen. So with the, of course, taking into consideration the specifics where, which is in the different location, different regions, different areas. So with the first phase of the decarbonization, implementing of the natural gas would be the very important factor while we have to do with the CO2 emissions decrease. So with only switching from the coal to the natural gas, we will have already 60% of the CO2 decrease. But taking into consideration that the various technologies, the various locations and various situation is ongoing, this is not going to reflect to every single region. So going directly from the coal to hydrogen could be more feasible in the one location, and going with the switch to the natural gas and to the hydrogen directly will be different one. As well, what is also very important and what should be underlined, still the infrastructure is natural gas infrastructure is being developed. So there are a number of the projects that are ongoing. So the whole structure, let's say whole backbone, is under construction and reconstructions. So summarizing, so the decarbonization and the potential of the infrastructure, gas infrastructure, is need to take into consideration. And the infrastructure can be used both as a blend of the hydrogen, but as and then with the retrofit, it can be used directly to the transportation of the hydrogen. So as I mentioned before, it also depends on the various of the aspects. What also is very important and what most probably will be defined with the various of the EU economies where the coal is a still important factor, we most probably we will see the kind of the industry clusters. So especially those regions who are really highly energy intensive will have much more of the hydrogen in use, for example, for the steel production or the fertilizers or the cement refineries, etc. So this value chain will as well need to reflect with the gas and infrastructure and the infrastructure which is already in the place and can be used. But what is important, it will be step by step. So from 2030 to 2040 and then to 2050 with net zero economy. So we are giving the most possible flexibility and the access to the resources that will be used by the regions today, carbonization. But what also it's very important in here that there needs to be kept the technology neutrality. So those who are supposed to use our infrastructure, they need to as well take into consideration the best possible solution and technologies that are for their importance. But what also needs to be underlined, lots of investments, and our experience with the natural gas investment gives that there needs to be lots of the financial resources. So as well for the further development of the infrastructure and being kind of enable of the whole decarbonization process and the changes, it's very important to have a financial support. And this would be very important that we will have a central EU lending possibility and to be sure that the recovery and innovation framework will as well include possible big scale investments to the hydrogen infrastructure. Next slide, please. So as you can see, we can define 3 different areas where we see the important role of the gas infrastructure. So this market aspect. So whenever it will be needed, as for example, with the clusters, there will be much more hydrogen to come, and our role with the open access to the grids, with the guarantees of origin and their certificates linked to the ETS, and of course the green gas emission assessment, infrastructure. So as I mentioned before, the including of the backbone and with the T1DP 2022, the interlinked model between the ENTSO-G and ENTSO-E. So it's very important for us to have a good cooperation and cross-sectoral infrastructure planning. And as the last one, we as a TSOs and our integration of the energy system. So TSOs as the owners and development of the hydrogen infrastructures, TSO as the system integration for the molecules with the electrons, and the smart TSO services are already supporting the clusters. So the wide and technological support towards the implementation of the hydrogen in the regions. Next slide, please. So plus minus, that would be the most summarizing role of the hydrogen and the role of our natural gas infrastructure towards implement the bigger quantities of hydrogen to come as soon as possible into the whole regions.
Thank you, Jakob. Thank you very much for that presentation. And I think raising the issue that, of course, it is a question of infrastructure, which is always linked, and gas infrastructure companies know that very much, that infrastructures of that size are linked to very long-term investments and very large investments. And we need a framework to really steer the process towards a good use of existing infrastructure for future hydrogen issues. And I'll also like your point, Jakob, saying, of course, the regions are very different and need a very specific approach. Despite the fact that, of course, interlinkages between regions with infrastructure is possible, but of course you need to look at individual regions.
This is why, if I can only add one more word, this is why I was not reflecting to the source of the hydrogen, because, for example, with the additional quantity of the natural gas to come, with the, of course, the relevant technologies, we can use the natural gas to be source of the hydrogen. But with another technologies in another investment in the different regions, we can see that, for example, green hydrogen will be with the bigger quantities. So the most important will be to keep this technology neutrality and give the possibility to the member states and the regions to implement the best possible technology, and of course the cost-effective one that will be including this decarbonization pathway, but of course with the usage of our infrastructure as an enabler to do that.
Yeah. Thank you, Jakob.
Thank you very much.
We now want to go into a session with you, all the participants. I see on the screen that it's more than 170 participants, difficult word, sorry, joining. And before you have the possibility again to raise some questions to our speakers, we would have some very quick questions to you. And could I have the next slide, please? Jakob just presented that, and others have. And the question is, a regional hydrogen strategy, that is important. And if you think of the region you come from, or if you're not specifically representative of a region, just think of the region you know best. What is the process? Is there a hydrogen strategy yet? Is there a strategy under development? Or are there actually regions which already have a strategy complete, at least a solid first phase out? And I already see the answers popping in. Let's take a little bit more time. We have 22 answers, 25. If you want to vote, join at slido.com. Just put slido.com in your browser, put CRIT, CRIT3 into the field, and you can just click on one of the 3 questions or 3 options here. And yeah, there's more answers coming in, but there seems to be a clear message that about 2/3 of the region are looking into hydrogen and are developing their strategy, while 1/3 of the regions do not seem to be working on it, or at least that's our view as we participate in this poll here. Okay, thank you. That was just to get a first impression. I would have another question, and I would like to jump to the next slide. Oops, there seems to be something missing. Okay, I'll read out the question so that you get the full picture. Many of you have raised the question of skills, and if we think of how to harvest the business models, the economic potentials, the job potentials of hydrogen in core regions, where do you think skills and knowledge are most needed? What is most important? Is it research centers in university? Is it innovation in companies where companies need to build up skills? Or is the topic of reskilling workers the most important issue that you think should be addressed? Okay, it's a little bit like in the US elections, there seems to be a twist, right? After initial lead of the research centers, the innovation and companies have been picking up. Any more votes on this? Yeah, and it seems like we have some diverse views. I assume we would all agree that all of the 3 are important in one way. It's just a question of where do we put the strongest importance, but it is a clear message that innovation in companies is seen by half of those who participated in the poll as most important. Research centers and universities and reskilling of workers are both also considered as important, and we'll definitely be able to touch upon that in the Q&A, and you can we'll have the possibility to raise a question in the Q&A in a minute. I would then go to the next slide, and that gives you the opportunity to add a statement or a word freely, and the question is, what kind of jobs do you expect that a hydrogen economy could bring to EU co-regions? And anything, how you would like to characterize it? Is it, I don't know if I want to say anything to prompt you. Okay, no, I don't need to. I just leave that running a little bit to give you some time to enter something, but engineers, engineering, qualified jobs are quite high on the list, but there's also workers, skilled workers, blue-collar jobs, high-income jobs. So there seems to be a wide variety of, or different views of whether it's stronger, the well-paid, very specialized people, or more blue-collar workers, or a mix of that. And there's also jobs that probably don't necessarily just sound like hydrogen jobs, like programmers, project managers, transfer managers, maintenance. Okay. Yeah. Thank you for your impressions. And with that, I would hand over to you, Carsten, to guide us through some Q&A and discussion with our panel.
Yes, thank you very much, Timon. And thank you very much to everyone to give us an impression of what you see in a hydrogen here in different aspects. I'm now looking forward to talk to Alice Gellenkamp from ENTSO-G AG, Mark Rechte. Yeah. I think Mara has left us, but she left us with a message in the chat. Inviting you to get in touch with her and exchange on your opportunities that you see within the hydrogen valley that Netherlands is creating. Having said that, I would like to pick up. Yes.
Carsten, I'm still here. Alice was named just in case that I had to leave earlier. So I'm
Wonderful.
Still here.
Thank you, Hans, for staying, and thank you for switching on the camera. Wonderful. Maybe, Hans, indeed, the first question, which what you have been presenting at the Reallabor in Saxony-Anhalt, and it relates to a question which came through Slido, and maybe we can still take some questions within Slido that have been posted previously. There was a question on if coal-fired plants actually can be refurbished, can be repurposed to be used for hydrogen. Now, you have put forward a case where you used mines, caverns for a different purpose. Can you give us an answer on this very interesting question?
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm definitely not a specialist when it comes to coal-fired power plants. What I know, since we belong to ENBW, which runs also quite a few coal-fired power plants, the normal transition goes via gas-fired power plants, and then design the gas turbines in particular being ready for taking, let's say, 10 to 20% of hydrogen, in case that we want or can deliver a mixture of methane and hydrogen. It's still under discussion, I know, and then convert by time, depending on the development of the infrastructure and the supply of pure hydrogen, converting those gas-fired power plants then to 100% hydrogen. So that is the usual way I know from our specialist. Converting directly a coal-fired power plant with some modifications to hydrogen, I'm not aware of.
Okay, maybe is with his knowledge, but maybe also with the perspective, as we had some questions in relation to the impact of hydrogen, the hydrogen economy, hydro ecosystems, as you put forward, in terms of jobs and reskilling of workers. Maybe you have further studies that you can cite apart from what we already heard, but maybe also in relation to using any piece of existing coal related infrastructure for the purpose of hydrogen.
Thanks, Carsten. Those are a lot of questions. I'll try to capture them all. First of all, I'd like to complete what I was saying earlier on in terms of looking at the energy transition from a cost perspective rather than an investment perspective. And I think this is part of the dialogue that perhaps we should address, because in fact, the energy transition is a huge investment, but it is also a huge opportunity in terms of that investment. So I think someone earlier on mentioned cost effectiveness of the energy transition. I think that the dialogue should be switched much more towards the let's say investment effectiveness of the energy transition, specifically looking at what you're referring to right now, which is how can we build industries, how can we create jobs, and how can we attract more investment into the regions where communities are impacted because our existing energy sector is disappearing. So that on the relevance between cost and investment, perhaps, but it's the dialogue that's important. In terms of infrastructures that can be used from existing carbon-based industries, I think there are a number of good examples already in terms of using existing old coal pits for deployment of solar plants, for instance. I mean, it's just an idea, just a suggestion, right? It's being looked at. It's looking obviously at the natural gas pipeline and grid infrastructure. That's also an obvious one. I think what we need to be creative from the private sector side to come up with ideas of how we can monetize in the right way some of those infrastructures in new business models going forward. And what we're trying to do in North Rhine-Westphalia, for instance, is a small example of that. It's really looking at, okay, how can we use the industry that's there as a demand source and connect it to something that can become a supply source and a job creating source, right, from a regional perspective. And it's definitely possible, I'm sure, in many different ways. But of course, each region has its own specific characteristics. So we need people that think a little bit out of the box, perhaps, and connect the dots. to build these new integrated cross-domain business models. So that would be my suggestion for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. I would have a question to Jakob. I picked out of the questions in the Q&A, and I mean, if we look at the electricity system, there has been a lot of discussion about how the electricity system changes into smart grids, becoming decentralized and things like that. Do you see similar things for the gas system, a special mix of very decentralized hydrogen production next to steel plants, for example, a mix of hydrogen being shipped to smaller sites? I saw a ship on Mark's presentation, for example, and that a mix with the existing infrastructure in terms of gas networks. How do you see that, Jakob?
So indeed, it's like, let's say, lots is happening in that respect. And of course, I'm in here, I'm representing the transmission part of the value chain, but still we need to, for example, take into consideration the LNG side and the terminals. I know that there is as well a number of work done there with the decarbonization of LNG terminals. But coming back to the gas infrastructure, this is what I told you during the presentation. Most probably, while the coal regions are high energy intensive ones, so there will be kind of the industry clusters where there will be higher than somewhere else the demand for the hydrogen. So there will be two aspects of our infrastructure that will need to be taken into consideration. So first, how to well connect with the sources of the hydrogen in order to be sure that this hydrogen will be delivered where we need it with the high quantities. And secondly, to be ensured that our infrastructure will be well developed and well skilled to be used with the aspect of the natural gas as well, to be used more locally. So this is why we can see as well the number of the member states that the blends will be more important than in others hydrogen. So it's the variety of the different aspects that need to be taken into consideration.
Thank you very much, Jakob, and actually thank you all for presenting and the different cases here throughout the 2 hours that we had foreseen for this panel. I do see that actually we would need even further time, but maybe it's just the initial conversation, one step further into the evaluation. Is hydrogen for my core region the right approach? In which way it is? As we heard, there are many hydrogen strategies are very individualized strategies in terms of which region one is focusing on. And with that, maybe first of all, thank you very much for the panel participation. Again, a virtual applause to you already. But before we come to a closure, actually, Timon, you were starting off with the scientific perspective. Maybe turning to you, what key and takeaway messages you have been taken away from this very panel and from this occasion today?
That's a difficult question to answer in a minute. The scientist's answer would be, oh, it's complex and we need to look into it into more detail. That's good, more research. No, but as a side note, we will look into the issue into more detail. As the Secretariat, we will develop another toolkit, another guidance for the practitioners in coal regions, where we already have 4 of them out on the website, but we are currently developing one more, which looks at technologies and hydrogen and other uses of coal infrastructure. These will be topics that we definitely address in that toolkit. For me, the takeaway is really to very specifically look what an individual region has as a potential and what future potentials would be. And I think it's so clear that the pathways that the regions go with respect to hydrogen will be very, very different. But I think it is an issue that all regions have to look into and have to address in their unique ways, but the regions have to work on the topic.
Thank you very much, Timon, for your perspective. And maybe there is 1 minute, so let me fill this also with the perspective what I took away. So I think from Ruud we have learned that if you're interested in hydrogen, invest in renewable energies, because that whatever you use it for, either for hydrogen then further, or just simply for other electrification purposes, you should go forward with that approach, looking at the potential, the local potential you have. Then the fuel is special, as we started off with. You should look in particular no regret strategies, basically, where there is no substitute, but hydrogen could be the fuel, the climate friendly fuel that could fuel these purposes. Each region is therefore also different in that sense. We have looked at and have heard from Mark, from Hans, from Jacob, that actually green hydrogen, in order to be competitive in its various perspectives, we need scale. We need more scale. That means we need lower prices of equipment that is used, infrastructure that is used. We need, in that sense, innovation, reallabors like we have in Saxony-Anhalt, but we also need a clear price signal to conclude here from concerning the carbon market. So if the carbon price, the CO2 price is higher, then actually green hydrogen is competitive. And we do this all, the transition that is due to the ambition that we all have and we all share, which is carbon neutrality by 2050. If not earlier. So let's look further into this issue. Thank you all for participating. Thank you for the panelists, the presenters, to share their views. Thank you for questioning their views and for us for looking further into this, not only this time, but also in the future. So stay with us. Also, let me say, in the afternoon, we will have further events coming up. So indeed, stay with us during the entire week of the Coal Regions in Transition Virtual Week. And with that, a very goodbye and see you soon.